Welcome back to this special edition of Frost Over the World, where we're marking the 60th anniversary of the State of Israel. Shortly after leaving office last year, Tony Blair, the former British Prime Minister, was asked to become the Middle East envoy for the so-called Quartet, the four interested parties working for an Israeli-Palestinian peace: the United States, the European Union, Russia, and the United Nations. Mr. Blair, of course, famously played a big part in finding a lasting peace in Northern Ireland. But did he feel that progress towards peace was being made in this conflict?
The next few weeks will be pretty determinative of whether we're right to be optimistic or not. Over these weeks, there's a package of measures that we're discussing now with the Israelis and the Palestinians to improve life on the ground in the West Bank. There's the discussion about whether we can get a different situation in Gaza, which is terrible for the people of Gaza, also terrible for the people suffering in Israel from the rockets. There is the Berlin Conference on Palestinian security capability, because that's a major part of this. There's the Palestinian Investment Conference for the private sector. I think over these coming couple of months up to the end of June, I think we'll have a fairly clear idea of whether we are able sufficiently to change the reality on the ground that we allow the space for the politics to work. So in a way, if this is not a cop-out, and it probably is, it's a question I can answer more easily a little later on.
Because talking to Salam Fayyad after last week's meetings and so on, he did seem very downbeat, depressed, in fact, after the talks, particularly because of the position on the ground. He said Israel's done absolutely nothing for us since Annapolis, and the situation on the ground, the barriers, the obstructions, and all of those things are still there, and the settlements are still being built, and so on. And he really sounded rather down at that point.
Well, I think it's easy to be down when you see the situation that there is on the ground, and particularly, obviously, with events in Gaza. On the other hand, it's precisely that we're working to change. Now, I think it is possible on the West Bank to get significant changes, both in access and movement restrictions, in terms of agreement to economic projects. The donor community has pledged $7.7 billion.
How much have you got of that?
Significant amounts, actually. There are hundreds of millions of dollars that have come through already for the Palestinian Authority. So, and the Palestinians themselves are making the changes. I was up in Jenin yesterday, looking at how the Palestinian security forces are operating, but also the potential for economic development there. You know, there's a lot that could happen, and it's got to happen. So I understand why Salam Fayyad and others say, well, you know, at the moment things aren't moving with the pace and the urgency they need, and I think that's right. But I think it is possible if both sides will it, and this requires obviously a major effort by Israel, to make those changes on the ground start to happen.
Because it's all in the attitude and where people are coming from here. Because, I mean, if you take Gaza, the Israelis say quite openly that they are trying to squeeze Gaza, and the Palestinians would say they're trying to throttle it.
Yeah, but you see, here's where, with Gaza, if people wanted a solution to Gaza, it's there. I mean, it's perfectly obvious what should happen. The rocket attack should stop, the terrorist attack should stop, coming out of Gaza into Israel, because I know people don't recognize this properly, but the fact is the town of Sderot is in a state of trauma from continual rocket attacks and the loss of civilian life from those rocket attacks. If that stopped, Israel should then stop its process of retaliation for these attacks. You could then progressively start to reopen the crossings, not just for humanitarian goods, but also for some goods and services of ordinary commerce. It can
only happen. One of the problems is that that can only happen in Gaza, really, if there is dialogue with Hamas, who are running Gaza at the moment, and one can't see there being a dialogue between Israel and Hamas.
Well, there couldn't be a solution to Gaza without Hamas participating in that solution. But then on the other hand, Egypt is talking to Hamas and to Israel, and you know, I hope those discussions are fruitful. But people from the outside, and in particular in this region and the wider world should be under no doubt at all. There is a solution for Gaza. I mean, the humanitarian suffering of the people is terrible, but it is also true that if you're here in this part of the world and you look at the Israeli media, you know, for the Israeli politicians, the pressure is all on them to do something about the rocket attacks that are happening daily for the people of Sderot and Ashkelon and elsewhere. So, you know, it's not complicated, actually. If the will was there, it's perfectly obvious what should happen. The violence should stop. The crossings should progressively over time be reopened so that ordinary goods and services can flow. You can put in the humanitarian aid. We've got a stack of projects which my office has got agreement and funding for to go into Gaza. There's masses that can happen there.
Hamas getting involved in the way they did in Gaza has obviously added to your problems and so on. Does the fact that Mr. Olmert is under investigation, which may turn out to be nothing or something, but under investigation at the moment, does that hold things up, or can progress continue?
Well, I hope it doesn't. And to be fair to Prime Minister Olmert, I mean, I am sure he is completely sincere in his desire to make progress. But, you know, in a way, what this situation requires, and I understand this problem a lot better now than I did, you know, even as British Prime Minister for 10 years, you know, to having a fair amount to do with the region. Yeah. And the problem is that for this to work, the political leadership on both sides, which I think both of them are completely sincere about wanting progress, but they've got to get the support from the context, from the facts on the ground, to give them the ability to make the deal. I mean, most people know what the deal is, roughly, you know. I mean, there's no point in me going into the details, but there is a two-state solution that is desired by both sides. Most people know, roughly, the area in which
you don't want a three-state solution, do you?
There's no possibility of that. I mean, that is just A, it would be wrong, and B, it's not going to happen. There is only one Palestinian state, and that's got to combine Gaza and the West Bank. But, you know, there are discussions that are being had now on what would be the territorial settlement for that. But my point is very simple. The only way this can happen is if both sides, and I don't just mean the political leadership, actually support that process. Now, what does that mean? And it requires a big shift in attitude. It means that Israel starts to look upon the Palestinian state as something that it is in its interest to help create. Not that it simply permits, but that it actively goes out and supports a Palestinian state coming into being. And for the Palestinian side, you know, the truth is, any residue of sort of, you know, terrorist ideology or acts of violence, all that does is get in the way of the likelihood of a negotiated peace. So every time there is a terrorist act, all that does is it increases the obstacles for the Palestinian leadership to negotiate a decent settlement. And that decent settlement could be negotiated. And in my view, incidentally, sorry, just to finish this, the international community would unequivocally say, if the violence stops, then there should be a settlement, and it should be a fair and just settlement for the Palestinians.
And in terms of the differing, really difficult issues, when I went through them with President Peres, with Shimon Peres, he thought of all the difficult things, the borders and all of the other things we've been discussing, that the most difficult problem to solve, to bring peace, would be Jerusalem. Do you agree with that or not?
Yeah, I mean, I think in terms of the negotiation, when they get to the final status issues, Jerusalem's obviously, you know, difficult at every level. It's difficult in terms of territory, it's difficult in terms of governance, it's difficult in terms of its immense symbolic importance to both peoples. I sometimes say to people, the biggest thing that I've learned about this situation since coming here is that it's been thought really over the past few decades that the task is you conclude the peace deal, agree the final status issues, and then the reality will change. My view is that the reality on the ground has to start changing for the politics to succeed.
And if, in fact, everybody will be hoping that you succeed by December the 31st or whatever. But if the process is not complete when George W. Bush leaves the stage and someone else becomes American president, you'll carry on with the battle, won't you? You won't give up on December the 31st.
No, I will certainly carry on for as long as people want me to, because I think, you know, I've said before, when I was Prime Minister of the UK, I feel it even more strongly now, that the single most important thing we could do for peace and stability in this region and for the wider relationship between Islam and the West is to bring about a fair and just settlement for this dispute.
Yeah. Well, I was just about to say, in fact, and you touched on it completely there, what would be the effect of a successful agreement? A, on the participants, B, on the region, and C, on the world?
I think it wouldn't solve all the problems.
No.
But it would give us a platform which would make success probable as opposed to possible. And I don't think anybody should be in any doubt as to the stakes we're playing for here. I think all over this region there is a major question as to how it develops. I think for the extremists, the fact of the dispute can be used to galvanize support and to recruit people to an extremist cause. I think if you solve it, it says a lot of things. It says, first of all, this major source of poison between Islam and the West, between the Arab world and Israel, is then resolved. It says that the 21st century should be a century of peaceful coexistence between people of different faiths and religions rather than conflict. And it says to the region as a whole, the problems are not insoluble, provided there is a will and there is a just settlement. And I then think it would be a lot easier to get just settlements between Israel and Syria, between, you know, within Lebanon, I think all over the region, in terms of those in Iran who want to put Iran at the head of a sort of a movement of extremism throughout this region. I think it would pin them back. You know, I think it would make a huge difference, which is why, for as long as it's in the slightest bit helpful, I will carry on working on it.
Which could be 6 months, or could be 6 years.
Well, we'll see.
Tony Blair. After the break, we'll hear 3 very different responses to those interviews.